Hey guys, this is Jim here. Just wanted to welcome you guys to the Tuesday, May 11th episode of Politics and Plastic. We actually pre-recorded this episode yesterday just due to the fact that Rob is in a 9 hours ahead in the UK. So this will be a episode from that. And there's a slight audio desync around the 5 minute mark for just about a minute. So when you hit that point, just bear in mind that it does get resolved around the 6 minute mark. But if you're listening to this on the audio podcast, then obviously there's no worries because there's no video. So with that said, let's get in the episode.
And then I did a lot of I was in their marketing team when it was a very small team. It was only 5 people, so I made a lot of connections and kind of reached out to a bunch of different people kind of as time went on. Did the first Twitch stream for Games Workshop from LVO, that sort of stuff. So I was the company rep. But while I was there, obviously there was some problematic issues with how I communicated with the audience. I think developing a relationship with an audience is always ensconced in trust. The audience has to trust you and has to trust what you're saying and why you're saying it. Those kind of important things. And so even when I was working at Games Workshop, if I was doing coverage of a game and something wasn't very good, I'd be like, this isn't the most efficient unit, and then the Twitch chat would be like, blink if it's terrible, and I was like, really bad. So I think the Twitch chat got it at that point. They were quite adult, which was quite nice. And so then when I left Games Workshop, one of the things that I wanted to do was to make sure I set up a media stream about the game and the hobby that was in no way influenced by anything external. So it was community funded and community propagated. Kind of went off the back of a lot of other podcasts that aren't Warhammer related that were kind of happening at the same time, where people didn't get any sort of product or any sponsorship from anyone else. And so it being completely crowdfunded meant that you could have your own opinion. Now your opinion could be 100% wrong, but at least the audience trusts that it's coming from the right place. So I quite often in a show, I generally state my intent for what I'm trying to mainly what I want people to do is have fun and enjoy themselves. That's what I really want. And sometimes that means that, you have to say things like the app isn't very good. And then people are like, what? So that's the name. That's the reason for the name, basically.
Yeah, that's actually kind of that does kind of dovetail into the topic. And today we're going to be talking kind of like the ethics of sponsorships, especially when it comes to kind of I guess the media hobby media empire. And obviously I took a lot of inspiration from you, lots of other podcasters as well, and content creators as far as the kind of stuff that I enjoy to do. And one of the things that I always wanted to be able to do is be very, very honest sometimes, and sometimes that can come across as negative sometimes. And I it was funny, I had a pretty salty rant around the Drukari kind of truthers, and I know we've talked about that last week, and I've had a lot of comments, both good and bad. I've probably had about 50 direct messages, both people saying, hey, thank you for saying that, we've been thinking it, but we just wish someone would say it. And then I've had another 20 saying oh, what do you even like this game, why do you complain so much, and basically the opposite. So I've had this kind of and seeing that that dichotomy or that contrast of people that are thank you so much for saying that, I didn't have the courage to say that, or we didn't want to call them out, and then the other half saying you're a dick basically, and I can't believe you're saying that stuff, or you're attacking us, or it's really interesting. And I'm sure you've dealt with it, lots of comments in the past where sometimes you're thinking am I, you can take it personally, and that's actually something that I just recently described felt, which is for the first time I was realizing that no matter what I say, there will be always people on both sides of it. There will be people that agree with me, disagree, and then coming to the realization that I really don't give a shit. At the end of the day, my platform is for me. It's not for I'm not here to produce a product in the sense where I'm just trying to get the most views, right? For me, it's really about an outlet for me to talk about the thing that I love, the hobby, the wargaming community, that kind of stuff. And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad, but it's not ever driven by some sort of I guess oh, I need to get X more views, so I'm gonna do more family friendly content so I can have a broader audience. That's not my approach, and that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with other people's approach. That is what they want to do, and everyone can kind of do whatever they want. Right? That's the great thing about content creation, is you literally get to do whatever you want, and if people like it, great, and if people don't, hey, that's that. And you can make adjustments if you'd like, but there's no blueprint.
I think a lot of people misconstrue me and Pete, so the Falcon, of course, we're having a long conversation about stats. I've done the Age of Sigmar stats for nearly four
Right.
years, so the stats center. And so me and Pete have had like some kind of like long conversations about like what that means, how that was received, and all those other things for a long time. And one of the things that's really interesting is that when you put out like something that appears to be critical, is people assign that to negativity, and it's odd because how could you be passionate enough to do something about this thing that you love? Like, look at the picture, look at the framing of you. It's covered in books behind you. It's covered in paint to the side of you. It's weird that people would think that you aren't passionate about the hobby just because you don't like elements of the hobby. It's an odd statement, and it's just because people haven't really learned critical thinking skills. Like, that's okay. That's going to happen. There's like a lot of dumb fucks in the world.
Right.
Well, this is a swearing one. I'm not sure. Is this? Yeah. Okay. And I'm probably one of them. I, I'm probably one of the dumb fucks. But number one, I think
Yeah,
an
you can
important
swear as
point
much
to
as you
kind of
want.
remember
Yeah.
is this thing that you're passionate
Fuck.
is sometimes not going to be great. And for a variety of different reasons. Like, not just about the game mechanics, maybe the lore, maybe you love, like, in order for you to love that bit of story in a book or that other bit, like, there has to be a bad guy sometimes. Like, there has to be the other end of it. You can't, like, be all emotive and all love. And then the other end be like, but don't feel negative things. It's a weird paradigm for people to put on other people. It kind of like feels like it's a push on, like, oh, just like stiff upper lip, and we don't actually
Mm.
say that in the UK. I just want to be crystal clear to, but like man up and all those other sort of things, which seem weird about the hobby that you're meant to find joy from and love. So I think that's fine. And then yeah, just make your own content. I think that's really valuable because you can be right or wrong because you're not trying to be anything other than yourself and your opinion. And I think that's really valuable for people. I think that's kind of the point of what my show is meant to be. You go through, there's a really good video actually of Stephen Colbert talking about like emotional content and emotional honesty, where he was talking about where he went from doing the Colbert Report to moving over to doing his late night talk show, which is a really good kind of hour video if anyone wants to go and watch it. And he talks about some days you just aren't feeling upbeat, so just be expressive with the audience, because when you're a fake
Right.
internet personality, you're not really connecting with other human beings. And I don't really want to do this being fake. I want to do this connecting with other people. I want to be like, you love this thing? That's amazing. This other guy's like, I
Right.
hate this thing. I'm like, tell me why. It's like, I don't like it because like that's cool. That you're allowed to have feelings, right? I guess.
Yeah. So yeah. So just getting to our thank you. That was very informative, and I agree on most of the points. I will definitely check out that video. I actually find most late night talk shows like unbearable because of how fake they are. Like I don't know if you ever watched oh, what's Jim Fallon? And it's like
Yeah.
literally the guy looks like he's like a actor. Like I can't watch, I sometimes I'll watch clips if there's like a guest that I find is fairly like interesting. I might check out a clip on YouTube, and it's like the way he laughs and just like it's just like it's so fake and disingenuine, and I just can't stand it. So I hope I'm never like that. So I wanted to kind of start off that topic by kind of defining, I guess, sponsorships in general. And from my perspective, especially in our community of as a wargaming community, there's kind of two types that I kind of two buckets, I guess I put. So I have the one on the one side I have like maybe the smaller sponsorships, and this will include things like you're sponsored by a local gaming store or a map making company or a company that makes dice, and these are the kinds of things you hear. They're like almost like adverts on a lot of the a lot of the channels. Like FLG is going to support, there's come brought to you by the FLG network, and get their mats, and we're going to sell tickets to their events, and da 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 da. So that's like kind of one side. And then the other side, which I think is the bigger and more interesting topic, is the type of sponsorships. Well, and I wouldn't even call them sponsorships, but the type of I guess the Games Workshop content creator pipeline of like preview copies and the free product in order to create content for their channels. So there's like this like whole other set where it's like GW, you sign your NDA with GW, they're going to send you some preview copies of product, and then they're going to expect some sort of like review essentially in exchange for that product, right? So that for me is a little bit different than the first kind, just because of the fact that the second kind, it's probably a little bit less uh it's less important, but it's still important. But the second kind feels it's very, much more exclusive. They want people of certain sizes, whatever. And also, I feel like it's much more tenuous as far as like that's essentially you're talking about the main product that we're passionate about, right? So what was the, you talked about it a little bit before, but like what was your I guess, and something you famously don't take any sponsorships from any kind
at
of any
all.
kind, and you're entirely crowdfunded, which is something that I think is actually really important when you want to talk about integrity of content creators, which is like, that when they tell you what they think, it's honest and it's, it's unfiltered. So what was the like thought process for you behind that, and like how did you come to that decision that not just you weren't gonna I mean, I'm sure at this point Games Workshop would never give you sponsorships anyways, but for
They did offer actually.
oh,
There
okay,
was a maybe 2 years ago, Pete Foley, I was talking about something on Twitter. Pete Foley tweeted at me and he was like, "If you want us to send you any copies of books, please let us know." And I just
yeah,
tweeted back, "No, thank you. That's not what I want." And he
yeah,
even got an email, and I said no to that as well.
yeah,
So like even and like I think what Jim's referring to is that like I won't cut them any slack, and I don't
right,
think anyone should. It's weird. It's a weird situation to cut a company slack who makes millions to make the thing that you love better. It's like give them an easy ride, and I'm like, why? Why would I give the company an easy ride? Employees, sure,
right.
right? But like you want the thing that you like to be as good as possible, and I don't really know why people would give people an easy ride in that situation. So yeah, take no sponsorship at all from anyone in any format. We're completely crowdfunded via like Twitch and Patreon.
Yeah, and so as far as, and I'm sure of the first type of sponsorships, I'm sure you've had, well, I don't know. Have you had people approach you before to like, hey, do you want to sponsor? Well, our dice box or our mats or anything like that? Or is that something you've ever pursued or anything ever you've ever like thought about? Because for me, it almost seems like that's a little bit less malicious, I guess, because usually it's less about like them supporting you, but you maybe just saying, hey, especially if there's like say a product that you actually really like and you think is awesome, right? So have you ever considered that kind of stuff? Like,
No, because I think like because I get the kickback. I get like if I like something, then I should like maybe then I could like tell people I like this thing and get the kickback at the same time. But I think if I allow any window for the audience for that to occur, then everything's kind of suspicious.
right,
Like, and I don't like, and I agree with you. I think most of it is really harmless. Like, it doesn't really do anything. But I think just carte blanche across the line, just be like, this isn't a situation. And then people, if I tweet, I love this thing, or I talk about this thing that I love on the show, people are like, that's it. Like, there's no ambiguity there. There's no like, there's nothing like even so there's a guy in England called Pro Painted Studios who makes these really great little tokens that you can use because I think they're really really cool. Especially having played a lot of TTS, I think having some tokens you put next to your stuff is really good. Like I've done coverage at events, right? And he messaged me. This is really sweet. I said live once, I was like, "Why isn't everyone buying these tokens?" I kind of went on a tirade, and I went over and we kind of did a product review of the shop at that point. And I was like, "I'm pretty certain this guy thinks I'm a twat." Like, I'm pretty certain, like, he's one of those people that, like, doesn't follow me on Twitter, like those things. And he messaged me. He was like, "Hey, dude, just so you know, I don't think you're a twat." I was like, "Dude, it doesn't matter if you do or you don't. I don't care. The thing that you do is good, and it's a good thing for the community." And so, like, when you're given that freedom to like the things that you like, then you can just say this is cool and this isn't cool. Like I think saying things are cool is super easy. Like that's not a problem. It's the saying things aren't cool which really causes the friction inside the community.
yeah,
Like this isn't an okay thing. This isn't okay that it's happening. And people don't really like hearing that. And that's super fair because why would you? You're trying to zone out from a day of work and chill. You don't want to hear that something is rubbish. Why would you?
right.
I get it. So yeah, no, yeah.
And
I lost myself.
I find that really interesting because like when I look at traditional I guess retail, so like what is the first thing people do when they look at an Amazon product? They go and look at the reviews. Do they
Yeah.
are there, and what kind of reviews do they want? They want the bad reviews, right? They want to know, why should I not buy this thing? They look at something, they say this is really cool, like I enough for me to click on it, and I'm going to go look to
Mm,
see if there's any reason I shouldn't buy it. So when I look at like traditional retail experience, the tendency of the purchaser is actually to find out why they shouldn't buy it. So it seems to me people, and maybe they do often want, some reasons, but like a lot of positive reviews are like, this was great as described. Like it's not very like, thorough. But then what we want is we want the dirt. We go down to the 1 stars, we see, okay, here's some like, really bad experiences. And the thing is, and I work in hospitality, and I know how strong the impact of reviews can have on a product. So you have one bad review, and it takes like 30 good reviews to like counteract that, because the noise to like the ratio of like and power of one bad review is like 10 30 to 20 to 30 times as strong as a single good review. And so oftentimes in retail, people actually want that negative. They want to know, why is this thing that I shouldn't get, or why shouldn't I have this thing? And so why do you think it is that when it comes to, say, talking about products, people don't want that? Because I'd almost think that people would want more of that, but of course that doesn't jive with the whole concept of sponsorships, which is that essentially that company is paying you to plug their product, and you can't really be honest and give people that potentially negative downside. Or you have to like dress it up and kind of beat around it. You have to say, or compliment sandwich it, right? You have to say 10 good things just so you can sneak in the one negative thing, right? Like you can't just be like, yeah, this is a bad because it's bad. You have to be like, these are all the great things, this is really great, but okay, this one little thing, like it's just like this very like, I guess, like it's not very authentic, the way that people talk about those things.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of stuff to unpack there. I think number one, because people like to absorb um, they absorb media about the hobby because it's something that they want to either escape from other life, or it's their joy, right? It's their joy. They're not. It's not the same as buying a new sink or a tap. Or I just bought those recently, so they're in my head. Like where I'm like, I didn't care what a sink. But sink's a good sink. And I think even like when you go to something like a phone, and every 2 years or whatever, when you're updating your phone, you go watch a couple of videos to kind of see which is the right one, and what's going on in that kind of field. That's more like utility. Those are things that you want the review on. What you're really doing, I think, when you're buying Warhammer most of the time, is what you're doing is you're just fulfilling a joyous moment for yourself. I had a good friend come on the show, and we kind of talked about that momentary joy that you feel when you purchase some, that immediate kind of endorphin and elation. You're like, I bought the thing, versus the kind of like slow release of kind of like joy that you get when, or contentment that you really get when you've like finished an army, it's on your shelf. Like every time you walk past the army, it's on your shelf. You're like, oh, that's really nice. Yeah, that's really good. But it's so easy to get that hit of joy when you're feeling rubbish just by buying a thing, and you don't want to hear the thing's rubbish. Like you don't want to. You want to think that Bellacor's cool. Yeah, whether or not he is or he isn't in game, you just want to think it because you want to
Right.
buy it because you want it to be true. And I think that's a huge portion of it. And then, of course, like tying into where we're at with the content creators, they're in a very difficult cycle in of themselves, because they're looking to make sure the audience doesn't hear stuff, because the audience generally doesn't respond well to the negative stuff. They want to make sure they don't hear it, because they want them to leave from their 3.5 hour report or their 10-minute video. They leave with a feeling of like joy and fun, and like, so they'll go watch the next video. It takes a certain type of human being to watch like through like 3 hours of like rage or something like that. It's a certain it's a certain human mindset that you kind of have to be prepped for. And so like I think that's why we see so much positive media about what we do as well, because it really gels with the audience and what they really want. The problem is, and I think this is kind of what we're going to move into. The problem is that there's so much pushed about things that are really negative that it really impedes us as a community from having a better experience for all of us. And there's
Right.
so many different things that really like touches on, like whether it be tournament formats, whether it be terrain setups or terrain packs at all, whether it be like how people cheat, or like armies that are too small, whatever the situation. Like it touches on so much, and because other people generally tend to avoid those conversations, um, it doesn't get a lot of coverage, I guess.
Yeah, and like I think for me, one of the most important things, I guess I do approach, like, I guess I don't know how to say this, but like when I approach, as much as I like to buy models, I also like to buy good models, right? Like, oh, I like to buy good rules, right? So sometimes I will be turned off buying something because I find out, within before I've actually purchased it that it's actually not great. And so, and maybe that's
Mm.
the kind of competitive part of me. But generally, like I won't buy units that are rubbish, even though I think they're cool models, right? Like I've been eyeing this like Vampire Counts Gravediggers, and I keep in my head. You've put in my head that maybe the Bing guy's gonna write the book, so I'm like holding off to actually purchase the books. I'm like, oh god, I don't want that. I don't want it to be written by the Bing guy because then I'm gonna have bought all this army and it's gonna be rubbish,
Mm.
right? So I'm like, I'm painting my cursed city. I'm like, I'll use that as like a baseline, and if the rest is good, then maybe I'll pick up a whole army. But um, so I guess when it comes to those smaller types of sponsorships, and it's interesting because I actually like I'm in a very different position than you because I'm not doing this as like this isn't my full-time job. This is not as I don't do this as a like a source of income. So for me, it's a lot easier for me to sit here on my pedestal and say, yeah, guys, like don't take sponsorships, like it's no problem. But there's lots of content creators that do it full time, right? Like yourself and like Scary, like some of the Art of War guys, right? So these are all guys that do it full time. This is like their primary source of income, and oftentimes those sponsorships are a big part of that income. And again, I don't know the financials. No one's sat there and showed me all the how these deals are made, whether it's free product or cash or whatever. But at the end of the day, there is some exchange of goods or services for some sort of financial benefit, whether it's monetary or in product or whatever. And so I think for someone like me, it's a lot easier for me to stand here, as I said, like, and to kind of say, like, kind of be holier than thou with like my position. But how hard has it been for you? Has it always been an easy choice to turn away sponsors? Has there ever been a point where you've been like thought about it or thought, is there any room here for me to maybe like fit this in, or has it always been like really easy for you to just be like, no, this is just not something that I do?
Okay, like it's always been an easy choice because I think it's our USP, and so like crossing that line hasn't been difficult for me. I guess where it becomes problematic is where relationships can't be built that are fairly strong. Like where you can't develop really strong relationships with someone because you're always standing for them, right? You're at like Siege Studios, they're great. I'm sure they're great. Like they're great. Like it's fine. Like I have nothing negative to say about them. Never. I've got no experience of that. I'm sure they're great, but like, and I'm sure they have this really great relationship with this back and forth, and they do a bunch of other stuff. And I think that's probably been the hardest part is that the relationships that we've forged have often been on a more personal level with either the audience who tune in or with like individual people around the world. Like obviously we met because of Darren. So from Canhammer, like because he flew us over. So as well as doing all the talking head stuff, really my main focus is we do live coverage of events. We've been doing that. I did that at Games Workshop for 2 years, and then I've been doing it myself ever since for like the past three. And so that's kind of like my main focus. And it's when you're a sportscaster, which is really what I consider myself to be. Like is how I describe myself when you're that, you have to be honest because it's you in the audience. Yeah, that role of double one is tragic. Like it's awful. Like also that army is too good. That unit will not beat that unit. You cannot have that conversation with the audience. You're like maybe because they think you're a mug. Like they won't listen, and that's really important. It's been hard though because it takes a long time to really recognize, I think, for some people, why having something like that is important. Like Midwinter Minis did a video recently, or like in the past 6 months, about how he turned his NDA away. Right?
Yeah.
How he was like, "I've turned my NDA away because it wasn't really working for him." But he did it. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I watched the whole video, but it did sound like there wasn't a working relationship for him. Like the quid pro quo wasn't quite quid enough
Right.
for him. And so, like, that's a bit of an issue. Whereas for me and for my team, because there's a bunch of us on the show, I think what we've been able to do is develop a community of people who just go, this is cool. Like we don't need to take this, and the community has been supportive in that. Like people have long term supported the show, like via Patreon and other stuff, and have been like, this is good for the community to have this out there, and I think that's nice. That's the nice validation, I think. And then it's just making sure that we cross that line of like professional ish review
Right.
versus having a laugh.
Yeah, and like I know in like a lot of fields, like conflict of interest is a real thing, right? But
Mm,
sometimes it feels like when it comes to content creation, people kind of gloss over that, and I always thought that was slightly problematic. That um, and I guess maybe this is a good way to kind of talk, to kind of get into like that bigger and as you said, I agree. I don't think when a small podcast is plugging, say, like the local hobby shop, like that's like that's
no
insidious and
problem.
malicious, and like it's going to be the end of the world. But I think the bigger issue, and this is something that we've seen more and more, especially there's been more content creation, is these kind of, as you mentioned, quid pro quo relations with Games Workshop. And I know something that you vowed to do on your channel is to not talk too much about Games Workshop as a company, and I respect that. Obviously, for me, that's still something that I am interested in, not because um, I don't like Games Workshop. I love Games Workshop, and I think a lot of people think that like I don't like them. Um, I like their games, and I like a lot of the things they do, and there's a lot of things that I don't like that they do, right? And as you mentioned, they're what is it, like 5 billion euro market cap? Like they are not immune from criticism, right? They're a size now. This isn't like the mom and pop store that's struggling to make ends meet, and I'm just trying to rag them, right? This is a 5 billion euro market cap company. I think it's the biggest company on the London Stock Exchange or something like that, crazy, or like one of the top five, I think. They've got a huge amount of control, almost a monopolistic control of the space, I would argue, in a lot of
100%.
ways.
I would argue
And
that too. Yeah.
so whether or not they use that for good or for ill, I think is actually a really interesting thing that I'm interested in. At the end of the day, like, I don't think that we move the needle. Like, a lot of people say vote with your wallet. But like a lot of these bigger issues when it comes to like how they operate as a company need community pushback. Like people are talking about this, like just to get to the Drukhari thing is a really good example. There's lots of like noise around Drukhari right now, and we had the same thing happen in Castellan. We had the same thing happen with Iron Hands, Yunari, and like a lot of that. And I really truly believe this. If everyone had just kind of like gone along with it and been kind of like obedient, I don't think those changes get made. I think a big part of us pushing the giant, and so to speak, is making noise, is like creating pushback, and the individual customer voting with their wallet can't do that, right? So oftentimes it falls to people that have bigger platforms to kind of rally, I guess, the community in a lot of ways, to sometimes create a little bit of stir the pot, so to speak, in order to create enough of enough noise that someone in the ivory tower hears us and says, hey, this is an issue, maybe we should start looking at it. Because oftentimes I have felt that Games Workshop has been very dismissive of their customers over a long time, and I've been in the hobby for 20 years, so I've seen it all, and obviously in the last 4 or 5 years it's gotten a lot better. But we look at the Curse City debacle, and kind of it's still been unaddressed. No one's even said anything about it. No one's like, not a single apology, not a single hey guys, like we screwed up, we're sorry, like da da da. But it's like now we've moved on already. We're talking about AOS 3, we're talking about the new stuff. So when it comes to I guess where I was going with this is like, I think that it's really important that there are people who bring these issues to light, like almost like whistleblowers in some sense. And I think it's actually a good thing for the community that people are making noise when it comes to these things.
I mean, I'd agree, and I think that there's like a variety of stuff that you can kind of touch on. I know you said like I didn't want to talk about Games Workshop. I'll just quickly say as to why. Like I've been doing this now for a while, and what I love. This is really important. What I love is the game. I love the people inside the game. I love the models, and I love the lore. And I don't necessarily love all the lore, and I don't necessarily love all the models, and I don't necessarily love all the people in the game. Like I don't necessarily love all elements of the game at different times, but I'm very passionate about all of those things that I super care about. The company does make most of those things, ignoring the community because they don't make that. Um, Although it exists inside their hobby, but the community itself, like the company itself, doesn't need my constant conversation. Our conversation is should be done. I think the 40K app coming out should be everyone's conversation kind of over about how the community works, or not the community works, the company works. It was a terrible product that was delayed, mishandled. Eventually, when it came out, it was awful, and then they still didn't apologize for it, and they still try and make people pay money for it. Like moving from digital books to no digital books without any reasoning as to why, and then like making it harder for their customers to get stuff, again a negative. You could just list them off. What they do consistently do is make something we want to buy, which is fine. Like that's fine for a company. Normally That's what I like out of a company. Like, just do that, we're good. Yeah, I don't normally go into everything else. And the reason I kind of want to move away from the conversation about talking about them as a company is because I think anyone who's ever going to listen to the story is already like they're already switched on enough. If you like saw what happened with the app and Curse City and all the other stuff, and you are still like, do you know what? They're really great guys. Yeah, then I can't help you and I shouldn't need to. Like, we're in a different place. But what we can do is take the piss, which is really much more like that's much more fun. It's a much more healthy attitude to have. Like, they announced the launch of Age of Sigmar 3 2 days ago via some dude from his bedroom with where they'd spelt it wrong. Like, no one has spelt checked the image. Like, how is this not hilarious?
Yeah.
Like, we could be full of anger as well. I get it, but it's hilarious and it's really funny. And I'm just like, and I agree with you. I was really excited about the Chris Metzen launch. I don't know if any of you
Yeah.
know one of the Warcraft guys. I was super excited about his launch because I thought finally, like Blizz into the miniatures market, like compete, have a competitor, make them step like because they have no real competitors. There are other great games and there are other great miniatures, of course, but they have no one. No one's like swinging a bat at them at all. They're not even nibbling at their heels
Right.
really, and so they can do what they want. And what they want to do most of the time is predatory business practices, which is again fine because it's their company. It's not mine. Whatever. I don't care. Like, I love the game though. This is really important, and we should talk about that. And I guess what's problematic, you said, is when you do love the game and that game is controlled and organized and sorted by a company that's just a predatory business and not a forward thinking company that wants their consumers to have a good time. That's where the I think the things kind of misalign. Because really, you could disavow yourself of the company completely and just be like, I'm just going to have a great time. Going to have a great time playing on my miniatures. And you're like 72% win rate is actually phenomenally high. Like, it's dumb. 65% you should be gnashing your teeth. 60% really is outrageous. 72% is dumb. Like, it's a dumb, 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 dumb place for it to be. And I don't know, like, I want it to go to 80. That's where I'm at, Jim. I'm like, worse. Like, that's where I'm at now. I'm just like, just make it worse. Make it worse, make it worse. Because, like, you kind of need it I think at some point maybe you need the straw to break the camel's back
Yeah.
for the whole thing to maybe for them to start addressing things better. But I don't think they're going to. I think where it comes back to sponsorship is when you have some of the largest platforms not competently addressing those issues.
Right.
I think that's where, and then Games Workshop's relationship with all of those community leaders, I think, is another problem as well, and also a bunch of other stuff. Like, I think once you get into that quid pro quo relationship that Games Workshop has with huge volumes of their content creation community, but also their TOs and a bunch of other stuff, what you're really, really doing is you're making something where they are being a predatory business and they're being defended by other smaller businesses looking to make their money, and that become then are they predatory businesses? Like, how do we feel about them at that point? I don't
Yeah,
know.
so I think a really good example of kind of what you're talking about, like the recent Kill Team box with the heavy intercessors. I think in the last 6 to 8 months, that was probably the most widely panned release from Games Workshop. Like, probably unanimously, I saw tepid to slightly negative to like just slightly positive reviews from most people that got those boxes. Like, well, first of all, they sold out instantly, so like no one could actually get them. And second of all, from a value perceptions perspective, people were saying, how it was one of the worst value boxes Games Workshop has released. And a lot of those boxes end up in the hands of reviewers and content creators. And because of that relationship with Games Workshop, you could tell almost every video that I watched on, hey, here's the Kill Team box review. It was like they were walking on eggshells because they were trying to be so careful not to say something that would sabotage their relationship with Games Workshop. But at the
Mhm.
same time, trying to it's almost like what you mentioned, like blink if this is a bad product. Like, it was like they were trying to like almost like subliminally tell people, don't get this, it's bad value, it's bad product. But they're in a hostage situation, right? Because now not only are they in a relationship where they are getting an exchange of goods, which is beneficial financially, but also from a content creations perspective, there's a reason that I read Goonhammer articles on the Codex reviews as soon as they go up, because that's the place that I like to go to read those articles, because I know immediately when a new codex is out, they'll have an article, right? And there's content
Mhm.
creators that will have a review up the day one, right? And everyone has those sites or content creators that they go to say, hey, this is the person that I'm going to go to when this book drops, because they're the reviews that I trust or the reviews that I read. And Good Hammers are pretty good about it, but like you can all there's always, and they're not very I'd say they still have a little bit of a positive like spin in a lot of their articles, and but they're fairly honest as far as I'm concerned, for the most part. But like they definitely don't, they're very much more like solution focused, I guess is the way that I'll put them. But even then, like when I look at a lot of the codex reviews or content reviews, it's very hard to actually know as a consumer, that someone that wants to purchase the product, whether this is actually a good thing or a bad thing. And it's like I usually have to wait for it to be kind of the reviews to be crowdsourced in the general community before I feel like it's a good product or bad product. So how do you think that, like, do you think that's actually something that is fairly like pernicious in the community? Do you think that's something that's happening quite a bit? Or do you think that, I'm just wearing a tinfoil hat and it's actually less prevalent than I think?
Well, no, I think there's a couple of things to break down. Like, number one, like with the kill team, like the kill team was universally planned, right? Like universally planned across the board. But it had to be that bad for content people to be like, oh yeah, do you know what? Maybe this isn't the one. Like it had to be really bad, and not, I don't know, the terrain book. Like, they just didn't review it. Like it's like there's the app. There's another good example. The the content creators are in a tough position because they get their free product. If they say anything too bad, and then they get to release it on pre-order day, right? They get to be the
Right.
first out the door with the battle report or with the podcast or whatever. And then so they're getting those day one clicks. They're getting all the hype generated by Games Workshop to their business. And then if they ruin that relationship, they're then out in the wilds. They're all the way in the sticks with with everyone else, and their business isn't just isn't going to do as well, right? I think that's one of the kind of key points. And so there's always going to be some level of metering of what they're trying to do. And I think a good example, like I think the idea of being solution orientated is a really good one. Like this thing is maybe too good, or this thing isn't very good. Let's be solution orientated about like what we can do about that. I think where it sucks is that those reviews come out at the same time as it's on pre-order. So if you wait like a day to watch the reviews, do you still think that you're getting like a fair markup on the things that are good or not good? Because when you say what's good, what you really mean is like what's effective in game, what stuff works well, like what stuff can I build armies out of, what units am I looking for, like because it's an expensive hobby. Like, do I want this unit, do I want that unit, and what stuff is good? Now there's a portion of the community. See, what's really interesting is there's a portion of the community that when you talk to, they don't care if it's good or not good. Like they don't care. They only want you to say that it's all good, and they will never know that it's not good. Yeah, they're
Right.
just gonna play with their mates, like roll some dice, like not know how to play at all, and they won't even know that they're bad. Where it's problematic is for the tournament going community who need some sort of like benchmark for where things might be. And especially in a paradigm where potentially each new book is more powerful than the last, you need to be the first in the door to make sure you pick up your units that do those things, or you can grab them so you can get them painted and all that other stuff. I think that's really important as well. But then that's weird because really you're still waiting 4 weeks for an FAQ. So like you're not actually like you're buying into something that might not work in 4 weeks. So it's hard. I think it's I think it's I don't think it's malicious necessarily by the content creators, but they're self-interested. Good quote I always heard. It's not that people are against you, it's that people are out for themselves.
Right.
I think that's a really valuable kind of like quote, because then you really understand that these are people with families maybe, or maybe they're not. They just got like really serious like OnlyFans like habits, and they just got to fund them in whatever way they can. And so that's a part of the relationship. I guess What's really problematic is when those same content creators are also maybe playtesters, because and those playtesters also play in tournaments. I find that like, and then we can move into, if you want, relationships between them and tournament organizers. And because we've had that in the Age of Sigmar community, so as to not throw anyone under the bus for people who listen to Jim, because Jim, I think, will be listened to by more 40K people. We have a couple of tournament organizers here in the UK who specifically only really do Age of Sigmar stuff. But because they're also playtesters and they're also in that kind of inner cabal of like Games Workshop, like I don't really know what you call them, but you know who I'm talking
Yeah.
about in the 40K community.
Yep.
You know, yeah. Um, there's that special relationship. So because of that, you end up in some very weird situations. I'll give you a good example because I've got no problem saying this. We had Ben Johnson, who's the lead developer for Age of Sigmar, play with a army that was released that weekend, Fleshy, of course. This is like 2 years ago, and he was on the table playing his opponents, giving them FAQs. He's like, "I know the FAQ," and they're like, "Well, I didn't know the FAQ before I even turned up to play you at this table,
Right.
nor does anyone else. Plus, I have to just trust that you're not lying." He was like, and then goes 5-0 at an event. How a TO allows that to happen, and I
Right.
know how the TO allowed that to happen. How a TO allows that to happen and allows that to go off in his environment is weird. And then it goes into all the other stuff, that nepotistic business relationship of people who cheat or don't do the right thing, who need watching on the tabletop, but then you've got a business relationship with them. All of that sponsorship and interconnectivity can sometimes be very positive, but it requires some integrity. And Warhammer's not like the only version of that that's bad. Like FIFA are terrible, the Olympic Committee is terrible. Like sports are generally like corrupt as hell.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure more than one person knew about Lance Armstrong. So it's I don't know if there's a solution being solution orientated, but it's definitely a problem that should be talked about more. And you probably, because we're a really small community, that's the other point. You can like name these people. You can
Yeah.
talk to them and be like, "You're being a jerk. The way you're conducting yourself is negative." And I think you can have that conversation with people, and I think you should. But some people don't want to have those conversations. I guess. I guess.
Yeah, and like I always think about like I follow tech pretty closely and like gaming as well, like outside of like Warhammer, like I'm very into like PC gaming and also into like I always liked film movies and stuff like that. And one of the things I always think is really interesting is that like in all of those in tech and in gaming and in movies, if you don't have reviews, like, so generally they have NDAs, they do, they do screening for critics. Oftentimes they'll give people like advanced copies of the games, right, to play for the game reviewers. And tech, same thing, like they'll send out hardware to tech reviewers, they'll do benchmarks, right?
Hmm.
Whenever there's an NDA that is not lifted until the release of the product, it's very universally a sign that the product is bad. So
Hmm.
generally, if the company, so whether it's a movie or a piece of hardware or whatever, if they know that they have a good product, they will release that NDA as early as possible so that everyone can learn about, hey, this product is actually really good. The benchmark is good. That's a great film, whatever. And they want those reviewers to be able to start spreading that message as soon as possible. And usually when it's the opposite, when it's like the embargo is until literally like midnight of the day before, that's usually a sign that they don't have trust that their product is good. They're trying to there's something maybe trying to be hidden there, and it's almost universally true. Like anytime you see an embargo lifted early, generally the product is great. Anytime you see an embargo like all the way up to like release date or at the very last minute, it's generally the opposite, right? Now there's a few
Mm.
very small exceptions when they're maybe trying to hold off spoilers or stuff like that for like movies and stuff. But in general, there's a very strong correlation between like the lift of the embargoes to like release date and like the quality of the product. With Warhammer, with Games Workshop, especially with these content creators, often we have this. We're kind of locked into this. You don't actually see the reviews until like when I wake up on pre-order morning. That's when I'm looking. I'm not staying up at midnight to watch like Warhammer videos. But a
Yeah.
lot of times, you're finding out maybe that next day, the day of the pre-order, and especially now with the way pre-orders are happening, like pre-orders are literally instantly gone. So
Hmm.
you're in this situation where as a customer, you have to rely on these content creators um, or very late reviews. But oftentimes you're kind of strong armed into buying the product if you just want to get it, if like you're slightly interested. Like I bought Curse City, um, and I bought it because I was worried I couldn't get it. not because I actually really wanted to play it. I thought maybe I
Mm,
want to play it down in the future sometime, but I didn't actually buy it because I want to play it now. We're still in lockdown in Vancouver, so I didn't buy it because I was like, oh, I'm gonna put it together and play with my mates. Like I literally can't see my friends. So like
mm.
the idea that I would buy it for the purposes of just playing it is not true. I bought it because I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get it. Now that's been more and more prevalent in the last like obviously year with COVID and all the issues. And I don't actually blame Games Workshop for that. I just wish they were more transparent about that. Like, hey, there's 10,000 copies, and when they're gone, they're gone. Or if we tell the stores we're going to give them 20 copies, we give them 20 copies, and not they oversell and then they only get 8 copies. Like that's the kind of stuff that I don't think is great.
But it's the fact that they said the opposite, right?
Yeah.
They said this is available forever, and then they didn't. Then they deleted it, and you all know that story, so it doesn't need talking about.
Right.
I guess one of the things coming up for the 40k community, obviously, is the Beast Snagger box, right? Like the Orc box is already sold out. Like in my head, like it's
Yeah.
already sold out. Like, and then what happens to all the people who want the new Orc Codex, but the box is sold out? So like it's a problem. And if you're an Orc player, you're already going to pick up the box. But when it's not something like that, and it's whatever it might be, like a new campaign book or whatever, the like you are relying on those early reviews, and if you can't trust those early reviews, that's a massive issue. Like it's a massive issue for the community, and I'm glad you brought up the computer gaming, because actually I think that had a large effect on me, because that's what originally Gamergate was all really about, wasn't it? It was the paid for reviews that was really
Right.
happening behind the scenes. I mean, how many of these content creators who get early stuff, but this is a paid promotion? People have started to do it in the past couple of months. This
Right.
is really important, but this includes a paid for promotion, because that's what it is. When you get that early product, that's a paid for promotion. You're not getting paid a lot, whatever the price of a codex and a battle tome is, or a couple of minis, but it's a paid for promotion, and that should be on every Instagram post. That should be on every tweet, and it should be on every video, like inside the box. I know Vanguard Tactics, he did one recently, and it said paid promotion, and I thought that was great. It was nice to see that done. So big shout out to him for doing a great job there. And you really need to understand that these people are in a relationship with a company, and they're getting something for that relationship. That said, though, like a lot of these content creators also have they have a large war chest. They've got a lot of money, and so they're able to make some quite nice, highly detailed videos. Having X amount of time with the book before you have to do the review means you could do a more like quality review. I actually don't know if I necessarily see that done. Like I don't see the average damage output of Unit X versus Unit Y. I don't see. I quite like Auspex Tactics. I don't know if you watch that guy. Like dry as hell. Like it's like can't put him on late at night, or I have to like really motivated to listen to 45 minutes. But he does great work, and he's just like, this does this with this combo, and it does this thing, and I'm like, that's really great. I love that. That's really cool. I don't think he gets anything. I don't think he gets anything at all. But I don't really care, because he doesn't put any opinion on it. He's not like, this is great. He's like, this is fine. This does this thing, and that's all I really want. But with I don't know about you. Like, what do you see something that like, considering these people have the books maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks ahead of time? Like, it's just a talking headpiece most of the time. Like,
Right.
is that fine?
Well, I know, like, I don't know, just, again, coming from gaming, like, the concept of being a shill for someone is, like, a very, like, to be labeled a shill, which is, I don't know if that's, like, a very common term, but basically means, like, you're out there promoting a company or brand, and basically hiding the fact that there's a relationship there. And for me, when I look at some of the content creation, especially when it comes to reviews, I often it's really hard for me to take it I guess seriously, because I just don't know I don't know the depth of the relationship. I don't know, there's very few that I trust, I guess on the surface level. So it's really hard for me to like have that level of trust in them. And oftentimes, um even after the fact, then there's like if there's any pushback, I guess, on their review, there's like a double down almost, where it's like, no, actually, like there are positives. Like people are telling me, like, and I've been tweeting with Tom quite a bit, and he's like, I feel like he's kind of turned around a little bit, but at first he's like, oh, it's fine, like your car is fine. I'm like, no, Tom, if it takes like the top one of the top, like an IT WTC team, their best minds to like sit there and like really craft lists that means that 98% of the players will not be able to beat this army. So and I always look at Jakari again as like 70% win rate. It still means they're losing 30% of the games, but who's winning those 30%? It's like the very, very good players, and it's like against not as good players. But when you put two equally matched players again, that's the big issue. It's not that they're not losing any games. It's that for the majority of players, like I'd say, even though it's 70% win rate, that probably accounts for 95% of the players. The other 30% of losses is
See,
coming from the very, very top echelon, which means it's kind of unreachable. So 70% actually feels like 90% for a lot of people.
yeah, like this touches into a core point of those particular reviews in who that they're really targeting. So like when you have someone, I've never met John Lennon, but like he looks like he's a great dude. I watched his last game at the Dallas GT. I think he played a great game, way better than I could ever really even understood to play. But I think he played a great. I loved watching it. It was super fun. I really enjoyed it. Um, uh, when he's doing a review of something, you think, "I'll listen to that. You know how to play. That's really interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what your ideas are." But more importantly, he's not targeting that at he's targeting that at you and me. He's not targeting that at maybe 80% of the field at all because they can't play like him, like at all. Like, and they're also not putting the effort or the time or the energy into even being close to that good. So when you move to a different channel where it's someone who they play games narratively or they're having a laugh, yeah, or like I'm trying not to throw anyone on the bus, but like they're just making it so it's as entertaining for the audience as possible. When they then do a review and they're like everything's great, but everything isn't great. Like maybe everything's super strong, in which case everything is great. But sometimes, like inside a book, something's terrible. There are
Right.
just some things like you get your book and you're like, okay, this is bad for however long this is going to be bad for. This is just bad, like on the tabletop. But those guys don't know that. So the core people, the 80% of the people who are doing it as a hobby, because the people who are playing it time and time again, and they are content creators or they're like pro players or whatever it might be, those people like are invested in learning to be really good and play it really well. They already know they don't need help. That's not the audience. The audience we really should be talking about is the huge bulk, the 80% of people who are like not very motivated to do very well, or they don't really care to do well, or whatever the situation, but like who are being misled. In
Right.
some misled might be strong, but they're at least being kind of like patted on the ass. Like when your mate's like, "Ah, I'll have another burger. What? How it can hurt me?" It's like it hurts you because you're a fat shit. Like stop eating it. Like, like, what's one more drink? It's like it's bad, is what it is in that situation. And that's not always the case, but sometimes you gotta love people. And in this situation, that group of people aren't very good and they need the most love. And they're not necessarily getting the most love. Instead, they're being pandered to and they're
Right.
being like, everything's fine. And do you know what? They probably don't care. That's the most important bit. But apart from, I always think of this situation, and this is a bit of the impetus for what started my channel. And you might have heard this story before, but like when I started playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle,
Rest in
whenever
peace.
I played with ogres. I played it with ogres. And you guys might not know what anything I'm about to say means, but I played it with ogres, and I would throw them at uh, my goblins, and he purple sun across my army, which meant you took an
Yeah.
initiative test. So like, I think ogres were like initiative 1 or 2,
Yeah,
whatever. So
that's
I
a
either
lot.
lost like 5/6 or yeah, 5/6 or 2/3 of my army every time. And I was like frustrated. I was really, really frustrated because number one, I wanted to have a game of chess sort of thing with my friend. I wanted to like understand what was happening. So I started going on blogs and forums to really understand, was I just a terrible, terrible player? I mean, that could have also been true. But like, what was the situation? And the situation was that that's just what fucking happens, man. You just lose that game. If he rolls 6 dice and he gets 2 6s, you're fucked. Like, and if someone had told me that before I spent X, and like, that's a terrible game design. If someone had told me that before I bought the army, they'd be like, by the way, if you play against someone and they roll 2 6s, you lose the game. You'd be like, I don't know if I'll buy that.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't sound fun. Like, that doesn't sound like, and I think that group of people really need like love and help because that's me, the idiot in the room. Like, it needs someone to explain it to me.
Well, I think to kind of hammer that point together, which is like I actually worry more about that 80% because at the end of the day, like I could probably and I've said this many times, I'm not really worried about the Drakari in the grand scheme of things. Like I think it'll be fixed. I know it'll be fixed. So it's not like I'm sitting here just yelling at the wall or whatever. I know it'll be fixed because it's been like historically they fixed it. My issue is that those 80%, like it's great that someone like Tom Layton, who's like the I think it's Team Wales is he the captain of Team Wales or along those lines? He's a WC team member. It's great that Tom can go and put their minds together and craft a list, and with their skill level and with their ability and with their experience they can beat Drakari. That's fantastic. But the other 80% of people, they're going to play that game, get trounced and not understand why, don't and they're going to feel bad. And look, I don't buy the argument, and I know sometimes people say like, oh well, if people aren't like, you don't, just because you're not a competitive tournament player doesn't mean you don't like to enjoy and win games, right? Like I'm not a competitive chess player. Does that mean I want to lose every game of chess that I play? I'm not a competitive like Monopoly player. Does that mean I enjoy losing every game of Monopoly I play? No, it just means like I like to play games, and sometimes I like to win and sometimes I like to lose, and in either way I'd like to understand why those things happen so that I can improve on it, right? And I think that's fairly common. I don't think it's like I don't think this is like rare thing that like, yes, we play, I play like 40K at a high level competitively, but I play lots of other games very casually. And even when I'm not good at them, usually I understand why I'm not good or what I need to do better. Or there's always this like path of like, hey, this is something I could do to like maybe be better at the game. If I'm playing on my like console or I'm playing like The Witcher 3, sometimes I lose to a boss fight and I'm like, okay, I wasn't good. Okay, now I got to improve. Like I think that's a fairly like human thing. It's not like a salty gamer thing. It's just like, hey, when you're bad at something and when you lose, you like to win. Like it's, and that doesn't mean winning at all costs or winning like in a way. And so who I worry about is the, just like you mentioned, the two mates who are going to go, one's going to play Drakari, one's going to play Death Guard, and the Death Guard player is going to lose every game, and he's not going to understand why, because he doesn't have that like, maybe he doesn't understand that the book is just fundamentally too strong, and now he's going to lose his games. So
Yeah,
um
yeah, like, no, that's the key point, right? Like, the key point is the competitive community will sort themselves out. Like, they're good enough, like, that they know what they're doing. Like, they're fine. It's the other people who aren't fine. They have no idea. Like, they're just, like, throwing their stuff together. There's just some sad kid with his ogres like, "What's going on, man?" Like, just getting his ass kicked. And those people, because when you release a 72% win rate book to those people, they're the people who are hurt most. Like,
right,
in that,
exactly,
like,
I
in
agree.
they're the group of people, and arguably they're the people who give the most money to the people reviewing that stuff to help them. They're the people who they're the big brick of people who support all of these other people. That's why netlisting is a really good thing. I mean, I'm going to talk about this for a minute. Netlisting is great because it's just like a time saver. I'm like, are you good at the game? Yes. Cool. Like I play League of Legends sometimes, very rarely, and I'll just go on to Mobifire or some other thing, and they'll be like, "This is what you do with this champion, you idiot," and I'll be like, "Brilliant! That's exactly what I want." Like, it's exactly what I want because I do not ever want to take the time to learn and invest. Someone else has done the work for me, and in that situation, it's even free, like, which is great. So like I'm pro like someone who's had a long day at work, just picking up an army that someone else has said this is a good army, and you're like sweet, and then they buy those models and they build it, and they're like, this is my army and this is what I play. I think that's we should encourage that, right? Because it's a hobby to so many people. But when that army like kicks the fuck out of the other army, it's pretty hilarious. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, 80% win rate is what I'm really hoping for, Jim. Let's
Well,
go
I
to the
actually
moon.
like, I actually think like, yeah, as I said, I'm not too worried about it. I think it'll sort itself out. But I think the bigger issue, and going back to kind of like the main topic, which is like, we've seen a lot of like, there's been a small section of the community that's created a lot of noise around this issue, and then you have a lot of people that are kind of a little bit like their head is buried in the ground, and they're in denial a little bit, or at least not being honest and truthful about it. They're trying to offer solutions that are on the surface seem kind of hilarious. Like it's like, hey, my house is on fire. Okay, well, maybe take your garden hose and spray it down. It's like, well, that's not like, okay, that's maybe slightly helpful, but like it's not gonna actually solve the, my house is still gonna burn down. Like it doesn't matter that I'm throwing small buckets of water on it, right? Like that's kind of, or that's kind of what they're offering. They're like, here's a bucket of water to save your house from burning down. And do you think that comes from, like, where do you think that comes from? Because like oftentimes I feel like that directly ties into these kinds of sponsorships where they're so hesitant to say anything critical, that instead they approach it. Do you think that's a real thing, or am I being too conspiratorial? Because sometimes I feel
No,
like
okay, no, no, I'll throw myself under the bus on this one, right? Because this is fair. Because I even meter myself, right? So, as an like a point, there was a point where Age of Sigmar had a tournament army that was like it was Slanesh, where we had like a 75% win rate over like 6 months. I think it bottomed out at like 68, but it was like between 68 and 75 over 6 months. It was a horrific time to play, and this is non-COVID times. This was like full tournaments all the time. Just no one could deal with them, right? They were just horrific. And so I did a show, and I was like, and to this day, it's caused consternation. Where I was just like, just ban them from tournaments. I just said, just ban them from tournaments. Now people were ragging on me, and they were being really rude. Like, and I was like, they were like, you invalidate my army. I'm like, I don't give a fuck. Like, you having your army be so bent is making everyone else have a terrible time. But, and this is where it's really important. I'm invested in that as well because of tournament coverage. I want the game to be more diverse. I wanted the game to be more interesting. I went and did coverage when Iron Hands were at their peak. I went and did coverage at an event in Wales, right? And I was like, it doesn't matter. I was like, it doesn't matter like what we see happen over the next 5 rounds. This is like my opening monologue. I just know Space Marines are winning. But let's find out which Space Marines are going to win at the end of this weekend, right? It was, and that's a really hard pitch. It's really hard for me to talk to an audience. So I'm sometimes try and like limit myself because if you were honest and you said, hey, like someone's like, hey, I was thinking about getting to 40K, they'll be like, well, most of the time the game devs don't really give a fuck and they just put whatever they want out. Some shills kind of cover for them, and it's a bit fucky a lot of the time. But there are some great memes. Yeah, that's a fucking weird pitch to throw at someone, right? Because that's my opinion on what the situation is. It's a weird pitch. So even I try and sometimes make it not as bad.
right,
And I don't have tournament tickets to sell, right? I don't have entire industries of like content creation to try and organize. Like I think it's quite fun, like doing the battle report where you try and defeat the Drukhari. Like I'll throw Admech at them, and I'll throw Sisters at them, and I'll throw Grey Knights at them, and I'll try and make it work. That's good TV. I think that stuff will be interesting. But I think it's hard for the people who just want to have a bit of a laugh and make some fun story stuff and they don't put as much story in the codexes. That's a different conversation that really upsets me. I'm like, why don't they do that? That's fucking weird. But the reason I think that they try and cover them because it's also something that I do is because I think ultimately it affects their bottom line.
right,
Like, because it is. It can't be terrible because if it's terrible, no one's gonna buy it.
yeah.
Like, and if no one buys it, their business is fucked.
So do you think though, like, you mentioned a few times, and actually, like, I think this is a broader question, and sometimes this is something that where I start to doubt myself, which is like, it is just a hobby. Like, should we even care? Like, is this something that we're even having this conversation where I'm like, this is something that I think is actually important. I think it is an important thing for me
Me
that
too.
there's like integrity in whether it's a game I'm buying or a car I'm buying or whatever or a cell phone. I want to know that when I read a review or see a preview or from whoever has created that it's not like I guess like infected with any sort of bias. It's like so totally unbiased. It's honest opinion. It's truth. That's important for me as a consumer. But do you think that it actually matters when we're talking, just taking the piss, just, it's just beer and pretzels. It's just a fun, friendly game hobby. Is this like, are we just taking this way too far? Like, guys, like, a lot of people say, why do you guys even care? Like, just enjoy the game, have fun. Like, don't worry about all the reviews. Like, don't let this get into your head. Like, is this like an actual issue, or are we making a mountain out of a molehill here? Like, is this a larger issue, or is it just fun conversation, but really like just keep buying your things and just don't worry about it and just enjoy the game?
No, I think it's a really, really big issue. Number one, because we all care. Yeah. And let's put that into context. Let's talk about who we're talking about as well. Hey, if you're just a beer and pretzels guy who doesn't really learn his rules and plays a game 3 times out of the year, I just like to be crystal clear that I don't give a fuck about you existing. Like as a person, of course, like live your life, and I want you to be a joyous one. But as a member of the community, literally I don't care that you bought 10 intercessors 3 years ago. Like fuck off. Like, but what I do care about is when you learn all your rules and you play loads of games and you go to tournaments, yeah, and you make this a living, alive thing that's super fun. Like that's really important to me. That's really, really important because that group of people, yeah, that group of people, breathe life into it. They're fun. They make events. They make lifelong friendships because of that. They hang out forever. And like, we've met because of that. Like you travel the world, you see all these people, you break down borders and barriers between different people. And I think that's very important. I think the greatest thing about Warhammer or tabletop gaming is that whenever you talk to anyone who doesn't do it, they always think that you're some basement dwelling nerds. And really, it's the complete opposite. It's a group of people who are like, "Hey, I'm going to go speed dating with a group of grown, normally men, for like up to 3 hours a time over a weekend." And I'm like, that's weird. And I'm like, it is weird, and it's the best. So I think it's really valuable to care about it because that community of people who we're interacting with and who I think in some ways represent to some degree need to have some integrity put out there. If we look at what's happening recently with like the cheating debacle and all that other stuff, like, we're all like, have some leadership, have some community focus, like push the boundaries of what this could be. Because there's nothing worse than really caring about something that's mired in rubbish. So I think it's a really important conversation. I think it's really important. It's just you're only really speaking to a small percentage of people, and you would really help a larger percentage of people, but they don't even really want the help. Or they don't even know that they want the help. I think is the thing, and maybe that's really arrogant. Maybe that's really arrogant to say that and just be like, why are you speaking for them or over them? Super fair point. Maybe I am. Maybe I can't see inside outside my own bubble. But I feel like that group of people could really do with the competitive community really pulling their socks up for them. I think that would be really valuable, and I think that's true of all the content guys as well. This isn't what I was expecting to say today. It's so fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me, I look at like, there's people that complain about the complainers. I just listened to a podcast last week. It was like literally the topic was like, why do people complain so much about the hobby? And I'm like, well, it's not for me. It's not complaining. I just like to talk about it, and I'm excited. As you mentioned, I've been playing Warhammer since I think 1998, and like it's a huge part of my life. And I have two full social circles in my real life. I have my like my non Warhammer friends, and then I have my Warhammer friends, and it's like they're
Hmm.
separate and apart because they're like there's like this whole other part of my life, and they don't really like they don't we don't have big hang-alongs with everyone, right? So 50% of my social interaction is with my like people that are in my hobby community, and then the other 50% is like people that I like maybe work with or friends I went to school with or people that are not interested but they're just like my neighbors, whatever. And for me, like, it's a huge part of my life, and I love it and I care about it, and it's like I spend so much time painting and buying and all this kind of stuff. And so for me it's really important because it is such a big part of my life. But I could see that there's some people that maybe just do this at a very, very surface level. But this is such a like deep hobby that I feel like it's almost impossible to do casually. Like even the most casual hobbyist, imagine someone that likes the game Monopoly and then plays Monopoly casually and compare them to someone who plays Warhammer casually. The Warhammer player is going to have 10 times as much time invested, even at their very casual level, between buying, assembling, painting, playing, right? The game is only like a quarter of the hobby, right? You're talking about it, you're reading about it. Like, do you do that with any other game that you play? Like, unless you're like, have you ever heard of anyone being like, I love a lot of other pieces. Like, I like The Witcher 3. It's one of my favorite games. I've never had a conversation with it about anyone except to say, yeah, it's a great game. You should get it. Like I've
It's the same with books. It's the same with
yeah.
books, right? Like you can like read a whole series of books and like these books are great, and then you like almost never bring it up because there's almost no one who's ever gonna like be that much into a book. And then even then, books that I've loved, like The Wheel of Time, let's say, like I haven't gone on like the Wheel of Time fandom.com. I'm sure there is one, but I've never gone into that depth. Right? Like even people who casually Warhammer, like and because like it's also not very fun. Can we talk about that for a minute? Sometimes it's just not fun. Painting an army sometimes just isn't fun. Like it's a grind. And then you're like, I've got to learn all the rules for my army. That's a grind. Like it's like homework sometimes. Like I've got to read the pack and make sure I know what all that means. What does each keyword mean for each piece of terrain? That sometimes like it's a lot of effort to get to the stage where you're doing it competently. And sometimes that's not fun. And I think one of the things that like it's pitched as from Games Workshop is that it is that easy to just pick it up and play.
Right.
And it isn't, right? Like, it isn't that easy to pick it up and play at
It's
all.
very intimidating. Like when I talk to like I used to work for Games Workshop retail when I was like 16 to 19 for 3 years, and
Mhm.
I remember having people come into the store, people that had never seen it. They're like, "What is this?" And just like that very first pitch of explaining, you buy these models, you assemble them, you paint them, and then you play a game, and then showing them a tape measure. That was like, oh my god, this is so complicated. Like that, just like those 3 or 4 steps, right? Like
Mhm.
it was just like just people wrapping a head about how much it actually takes to play a single game, like all the things you have to, all the hurdles, and kind of, I don't look at them as hurdles because I enjoy those steps, but not all the time. Sometimes I'm like, I remember painting like 20 possessed for LVO, and chaos trim, it like literally I have nightmares about chaos trim, and it's like it's just a grind, right? Like it was just it took like I just hated it, like I hated every minute of it, and I this is coming from someone that loves painting in general. I just hated it. I was like, I was just so miserable, but I was like, I have to do this because I want this unit done. But like people, I think, like when you look at the stages to actually get in and play the hobby, it is quite involved. Even at the very basics, like the very casualist level, it's still very time consuming and very involved and expensive on top of that, right? And when we're
Mhm.
talking about things that are, do you know the last time I spent $170 on a video game was? Never, ever in my
Never.
life. Not even $100, right? But I will easily drop $200 to $300 on models in a weekend, right? Like that's, it's just not even blink, right? But then I spend $60 for a video game, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Or like there's so many other things like that. I just, the value perception in my personal eyes is like, I get that model though, I'm gonna have forever, right? Unless I sell it. But like for the
It's
most part,
it's
yeah.
yeah, like, no, I agree with you, and do you know what's the weird thing about, like, to go back to the beginning of the show when you're talking about quality, or more importantly about complaining, yeah, is the company make a ton of money.
Yeah.
Like a ton of money. Like, we're not talking when you're talking about that video game, yeah, they oftentimes make a ton of money as well. That's that business setup. But these people make a ton of money. Like, it should be getting better, not I don't think it's getting worse. I want to be really clear about that. I'm not. But I don't think necessarily some of the stages we've seen are better. I don't think the campaign books on top are necessarily are better. I don't think that that's a positive. Obviously, the app. I don't think maybe pitching a book that you don't really understand how powerful it is into a meta is better. Like, I don't like, and you would think with the money you have, you'd be trying to produce a better product. You'd be reinvesting, right? R&D. You'd be putting that back into the game to make the game better instead of all synthetic paintbrushes. I'm sure they're really important to someone in the world, but like I probably would have preferred a book that was pitched at like a 60% win rate. Like just a little bit of time and understanding on how to make that happen would be better. So when we talk about the complaints, we forget just how much money and how much time is put into this from every one of the consumers. In fact, actually, ignoring money, just time, obsessive amounts of time. It shouldn't be very hard to make the whole thing a bit better. And I think, like you said at the beginning, pushing for that would be great. Like because they've got these Warhammer events now, right? The Pro Tours or whatever it is that they've just announced so across America. Um, this thing. And I'm like, are they going to have judges? Are they going to have like professional judges who call things? Like, because once they make one call at a tabletop in any one of these matches, is that surely not Games Workshop sacrosanct? This a Games Workshop decision now.
Right.
Like, does that carry across to all other platforms ever? I don't know. I
Yeah.
would
So
say that one of the things to talk about when it talks about sponsorship and people's direct relationship with Games Workshop is that I think it's unfortunate how much those people like I've jokingly been throwing some flack at Scary on Twitter for the Drukari book. Like we've been having a joke about it, right? Like, but I don't blame Scary in any way. But it's the company's fault. But they always disavow themselves through content creators. I think that that is a negative we don't sometimes talk about for those people. But I mean, you hold the hand of the devil, you're going to get treated as such, I guess. But
yeah.
like, that's on them. I
Like, sir, do you mean like that they use the content creators as kind of a shield to say, hey, look, actually, there's all these people saying that it's fine?
yeah, a good example would be when the table sizes got smaller.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, like so there was a kind of like a couple of days kind of like there was a community post and there was an FLG kind of statement. And like this was last year. An FLG statement was like, look guys, we didn't get to make any decisions about like the fact that the table sizes were getting smaller, and we didn't know anything. I mean, you sold a bunch like after OVO, but that's a whole different conversation. Like, but like you know, they said that right, and they were like, we didn't know. But this is the situation. This has come from Games Workshop. The table sizes are smaller now. Yeah, that's the situation. So that's what we're running with. Yeah, fair enough. Okay. But then there was a community article, and I remember like going off on going off on one of the shows, just a community article being like, play the game on whatever table you want at your tournaments or whatever you want. Like it was a community post that said that, and I was
Yeah.
livid for FLG in that particular instance because they just threw them under the bus, using them as their front to say we're making all these events smaller now because where FLG go, everyone else goes, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how it works. So they were like, we're making it all smaller, adhering to what Games Workshop said, and then Games Workshop put a post out and say, we'll do whatever we like. And I just don't see that as being fair because then they copped a load of flack for really someone else's decision. I personally think the board size being small is cool. Like, but you know, you could have just led with that, and that's fine. I don't know. I think there's something to be said there as well. Like,
So yeah, so I guess being solution orientated, what do you
let's go
think? What
Goonhammer.
do you think? What do you think the solution is for this issue? Because for me, it's starting, especially as there's been more and more of these relationships. Like if compared to 5 years ago, the content creator sponsorship pipeline has only grown. So there's more and more people getting preview copies, more and more getting people getting product, more and more people doing reviews. That's only grown in the last 5 years. Like I never used to look at YouTube videos or podcasts on reviews 5 years ago. That just didn't exist, right? Or maybe they're very, very few and far between. Obviously, in the last like 5, 6 years, that's grown. And for me, it started to, I guess, sour my not just my opinion on the product, but also sometimes the content creators. Like it started to it's made me look at them in a new light. And again, I don't blame them. Like, look, at the end of the day, you got to hustle and you got to make your hustle
I
for
hustle.
yourself, right? Like advocate for yourself, fight for yourself, do what's in your best interest, right? Like I'm all for that. I have nothing wrong with them doing that. I think where I have a lot of issues is the lack of transparency and then the lack of honesty and integrity. And for me, I guess my question is like, well, what is the solution? Because it's either going to be the content creators that decide, okay, like we're going to start being honest, just like Midwinter did, and being like, hey, I'm going to step away from this because not only is it not working for me, but like I don't feel comfortable under this system where I'm basically like, I have to kind of toe this line, or it's gonna be Games Workshop that eventually like, and there's a lot of and again going back to like hardware reviews, the nice thing about hardware reviews is it's very objective. It's like here's the benchmarks, here's the frames per second on the GPU, here's the speeds. There's and then at the end you can just look at the numbers and say, okay, this is either good or it's bad, right? Like it's not very like subjective. Whereas when it comes
Mm.
to this kind of stuff from Games Workshop, it is very subjective. Oftentimes it's opinions, it's like conjecture, it's speculation, whatever. So for me, like I guess I don't see a future where Games Workshop, especially the way that their business practice, as you mentioned, have continued, right? They haven't, although their community engagement has gotten better, their business practices haven't really gotten better. They're still doing a lot of like things that I think are very, just not like, I look at the Lumineth book and the fact that they released two books, what was this, 8 months apart? And I
Mm.
just, like, there's no way they didn't know that second Lumineth book was coming when the first Lumineth book was getting released, right? Like, that was, their lead times are so long, right? They knew that,
Yeah.
and the models were sculpted even before that, right? Because they were talking 3 year lead times on these models. So they knew when that first book was coming that there was going to be a second wave of the whole new book. And so I look at
Yes.
something like that and it's like, okay, that's just poor. That's just like, that's really like taking advantage of your customers because just there's a lot of complaining, but a lot of people just bought that second book because they're just like begrudgingly, right? Because no one wants to carry around 3 different books.
Because
So I'd rather
no,
have,
because also because there's like an inherent point in there. No one wants to be a criminal.
right,
Like the important point there is that everyone's like, you don't have to buy the book, and it's like, well, I have to buy the book because I want to use the rules inside of it. And then there's like the nudge, nudge, wink, wink. You don't have to buy the book, and it's like, but I do because if I inherently want to support the company in the game, I have to buy the book and I have to use the book because it's my book, so I can use my models and my rules. Like we don't have to, we know that, but we do. Like so, like you're already taking you're already like up against it. Like they're like it's a paywall that you should pay. Like
right,
that's what it is. Like you should pay that. Like we don't all necessarily do that, but we should. And that's a real, because there's a whole group of people out there who don't want to they don't want to cross that line. They're not that sort of person. They're like, oh, like, they do their job, they pay their taxes, they live their life, they're a good person. Yeah, that's what they want to do. They don't want to like take something that isn't theirs. And so there's a group of people who are kind of pushed in that way. Anyway, you were more taking a point about the business practice, aren't they? But I just think that's one of those things that when sometimes we talk about it, and someone will reply with, "You don't have to." It's like, but everyone should. Like, and so what really should happen is the company should make a product that really works kind of holistically for you as a consumer. Like, I respect hustling and making money, but I think you can do both. I really think that there's a paradigm where you can do both, right? Like a subscription service or whatever it is. I think there's a really easy way for them to do it.
Well, and then I guess the like when I look at the solution, I'm as I mentioned, like it's either gonna be the content creators or it's gonna be Games Workshop. But then there's actually a third solution, which you mentioned before, which is I know with like Instagram, for instance, when you're doing paid
Mm.
promotions, it's very very they have very very strong rules around promotions. Like when there's a product exchange, like you have to basically put it in. There's like a tag you have to add um to your review or whatever like thing you're doing, and it's actually a big thing. It's been highly more and more regulated. So do you think that's something that's maybe even onto the platforms that should be taking like I know that like I follow quite a few content creators, people that are like lots of followers, and they have lots of different posts. But whenever there's a paid promotion, I know immediately because it says literally like paid promotion on the ad. And
Yeah.
so that's something that's enforced by say Instagram or YouTube. But that's YouTube is it's a bit of Wild West out there where people just do that's not ever clear. So where do you think this kind of reform of this system has to come from? Because for me, I don't see it as a problem that's easily solved. And then on the last point of it is like, then should there be people in the community like me, like you, whoever, who are willing to actually talk about and call out these kinds of things? Because I feel like I have like a responsibility to the community to tell them if there's something that doesn't pass the smell test that seems suspicious to me, that seems like there's a conflict of interest or that's inauthentic. I feel like it's incumbent on me in my whatever capacity I have, whatever platforms I have, to make sure people know about that in the 10 people that listen to the show. Like that for me feels important, right? Like that feels like to me like I'm doing the right thing. And do you think it's but then we get in this sense of like vigilante, like justice, like it feels like a very complicated issue. And I don't know what the solution is because I want the content creators to make money. I want Games Workshop to continue giving people those preview copies because there is actually a benefit for the community to get those preview copies. But I also want there to be like honesty in the system. And it like is this just like a lost cause here, or like what's the future look like?
I don't know. Like, is the simple answer, because it's like, look at this conversation. Like, we've touched on loads of different subjects over the course of this, and it's all been complicated. Some of it's to do with like how people feel about what they want. A lot of it's to do with how people feel, and that's so subjective, right? Like, and some people some people just like tell me a sweet lie wrapped in a bow. Like, who knows? One is different, and I think that what's best, like again to quote you from the top of the show, is that there is different content for different people. So, like the people who feel that there is an unhealthy relationship between a content developer and the company, and whatever that might be, any company, whenever you think that there's an unhealthy relationship, you can just move away from those content creators and go and find yourself ones who aren't. Or if you're not bothered, because and this is the point, we can't really vote with our wallet into Games Workshop because we really want to stay inside of
Right.
the community that we're a huge part of. We're never really going to step away unless there's a big developer that comes in and challenges them, and even then, not really. So we're kind of stuck into the situation because we want to be with our friends and play this thing that we really enjoy. But where you can vote with your wallet is with the different content creators that you support and you take on. Because some people don't care, Jim. That's the important point, and they're just going to support the guys that make them laugh, and that's great because that's what I like about the system that we have now. Is that if you love a thing, or if you love a person, or you think that guy, like that person, or those people are doing what I love, I'm going to give them some money. Whereas, like, if you don't like what they do, like we talk about Goonhammer a lot, right? Because they do some kick-ass stuff. Yeah, like, we talk about it because we like it,
Right.
and so that's good. And we can now. I think the solution is for you to create the content that you think is valuable and have an opinion on stuff that you think is valid, and then make a claim or a statement, sorry, that you're like, this is just you, sponsored by no one, being yourself, and then if people like that message and they want to hear more of that, then they'll come and listen. And I think that's super valuable. Like I think there'll be people who want on, and that's what I hoped when I started out, and it seems to have been the case. There were people who wanted that. Like I've got like, so we did the a reaction review video the other day for the Warhammer stream, right? For the reveal. At one point we had like 700, 800, 900 people in the chat, but the chat was just full of jokes. We've just developed this like laugh where it's like it's funny. Like all of it's funny. Like Jez Goodwin there was like, "This is the most watertight edition we've ever made," or something. We've clipped that. That's gonna be. We're gonna run that for 3 years. Like, like I think it's really, really important, and it's really important to be impassioned about it and care. And I think it's super okay to then step back from that and kind of take the piss a bit and have a laugh, so that we can, find that bit of joy that we have every day. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm gonna be salty as fuck when they get rid of digital books for Age of Sigmar. Let me tell you,
I
like
yeah, like I mean,
salty as
I
fuck.
could talk a whole hour on their distribution model right now, which I won't because that's like it's a whole other episode. But I agree with you. All right, Rob, it's been an hour and a half. I think we're not going to necessarily have solved all the problems, but hopefully we just bring a little bit more awareness to the issue and just ultimately I want people to, when they watch a review, when they read a podcast, listen to a podcast, or read a bit of content, I just hope in general that the audience is doing it with more critical thinking, a critical eye, just trying to understand, is there something there, and just at the end of the day, I ultimately want people to be happy with the things that they purchase, and I want them to purchase it with like good information, right? So like, hey, this is all the information, and I feel good about it, and I wasn't swindled because I've bought a lot of shit that's been like turned out to be like garbage, and then I'm like, oh, I wish someone had just told me that this was garbage, and I'm stuck with it, and I wasted my money. So hopefully that's ultimately the goal, right? All right.
No, no, agreed. Yeah, yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you. We've been talking to Rob Symes, the Honest Wargamer. Make sure to check out his site. Where can we find everyone find you, Rob? I know that I know everyone that listens to my show probably listens here. So, but where can everyone find you?
Just Twitch is the best one. Twitch.tv/The Honest Wargamer. That's where we have the most fun, and I like that because then you can come and have your opinion, and I listen to the chat all the time. So
And I will say though, like one of the things I love about your community is that it is a lot of like-minded people that appreciate that honesty, and it's something that I actually like that I was watching that AOS chat the other day, and like there was a lot of people taking the piss on GW for just about everything, like whether it was what's his name shirt, I can't remember his name at this point,
Adam
wearing the
Choke
same
shirt.
Adam Choke shirt for 4 days in a row, or the Stromcast Eternals, or all sorts of stuff. Like these are the kinds of things that I think there is actually a lot of people that think that same way. And then even the GW chat, which I think had 30,000 people, was just people ragging on them about Curse City. So there is a demographic here in the community that actually wants that like straightforward, honest information, right? But maybe
But
it's the
to have
vocal.
fun with it.
Yeah, so we'll
Yeah.
see. But Rob, thank you so much. That's the show,
Thank you very
guys,
much.
and tune in next week.